Okay, let's talk about the invisible forces that shape pretty much everything you do. I mean, everything. How you love, how you see yourself, how you connect with other people. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on these powerful, hidden blueprints of culture and gender. Seriously, just think about that for a second. Who actually taught you how to act? What to believe? What's normal? For most of us, we didn't sit down in a class for this stuff. We just absorbed it. We learned it from the world around us without even realizing it. And those invisible rules are exactly what we're digging into today.
All right, so our first blueprint is the biggest one of all, culture. You can think of it like the fundamental operating system for society. It's running in the background all the time, guiding our behavior in ways we barely even notice.
So, what is culture, really? At its core, it's this shared system of beliefs and behaviors that a whole group of people holds. It influences our decisions, our values, even how we see ourselves. It's the language we speak, our spiritual beliefs, our moral compass. It's like the very water we swim in. So, there are three really key things to remember about culture. First, it's not something we're born with. We have to learn it from our family and our society. Second, it's shared. And this is so important because it's what allows us to connect and work together. And finally, culture isn't set in stone, it's a living thing. It's constantly changing and evolving.
The specific instructions inside this cultural blueprint, well, we call those norms. These are basically the unwritten rules for what's considered acceptable behavior. They help us figure out what feels normal or maybe a little weird in any situation, from how we greet someone on the street to how we eat a meal.
But here's where it gets really interesting. This massive cultural blueprint doesn't just stay out there in society. Nope, it gets inside our heads, and it directly shapes the most personal thing we have, our sense of self. One of the biggest ways culture shapes us is on this spectrum between individualism and collectivism. So cultures that lean toward individualism really push an independent self-concept. That means you see yourself as a unique individual, defined by your personal goals and achievements. On the flip side, collectivistic cultures foster an interdependent self-concept, where your identity is totally wrapped up in your relationships with your family and your community. And as the famous researcher Geert Hofstede said, in these collectivistic cultures, this connection isn't a choice. It's a given from the moment you're born. Your identity is just woven right into the fabric of your family, your community, your in-groups. So, what happens when these different cultural blueprints run into each other? When people move between cultures, they suddenly have to figure out a whole new set of invisible rules. And that can be a really fascinating and, yeah, sometimes a pretty stressful process. Just take a look at these examples. In the US, a bride wears white, right? It symbolizes purity. But in a traditional Chinese wedding, white is actually associated with funerals and mourning, so brides wear red for good luck and happiness. Or think about funerals. In the States, black is the standard color of mourning. In China, while the family wears black, the grandchildren might wear blue. See, these aren't just little details. They reflect some really deep-seated cultural values. There's actually a psychological term for this whole process of adapting. It's called acculturation. It's what happens when you have to learn and navigate a brand new cultural environment, figuring out a completely different set of norms and expectations. And this adaptation can go a few different ways. The path with the least stress is usually integration. That's where you kind of blend the old and the new. Some people assimilate, they completely adopt the new culture. Others might choose separation, where they reject the new culture to hold on tight to their original one. And the most stressful path of all is marginalization, which can leave a person feeling totally disconnected from both worlds. Okay, so culture is one massive blueprint, but there's another just as powerful script that society hands us, one that lays out expectations based on whether we are male or female. This is the gender script. Now, here's a really crucial point. When psychologists talk about gender, they're not just talking about biology. They're talking about the behaviors and roles that a culture associates with being male or female. It's fundamentally a social idea, a social construct. And those cultural expectations, they get formalized into what we call gender roles. This is the specific script that tells us how to act. It covers everything from personality traits, like men are supposed to be assertive and women are supposed to be caring, all the way to the jobs we're encouraged to have. Okay, so that's the external cultural script. But separate from that is your internal gender identity. This is your own personal, deeply held sense of being male, female, or something else entirely. and it's shaped by a mix of both biology and your environment.
So how in the world do we learn these super complex scripts? Well, two big ideas are at play here. First, there's social learning theory, which says we learn by watching and imitating other people, our parents, characters on TV, you name it. Then there's gender schema theory, which suggests we develop this mental folder, a schema, for what it means to be a boy or a girl. And then we start organizing our world and our own behavior to fit that pattern.
Okay, so we've got these incredibly powerful blueprints for culture and gender. They definitely help us make sense of the world, but they can also create a lot of friction and conflict. So let's look at how these mental shortcuts can sometimes go bad and turn into prejudice and discrimination. You can see this as a really critical progression, almost like a dangerous chain reaction. It all starts with a stereotype. That's just a mental shortcut or a belief about a group. But that belief can curdle into prejudice, which is a negative attitude. And once you have that negative attitude, it can lead to discrimination, the action of treating people unfairly just because they belong to a certain group. So why does this happen? Well, a huge driver is this concept of in-groups versus out-groups. It's natural for us to categorize people into groups we identify with. That's our in-group, and those we don't. And that's where the trouble starts. Prejudice and discrimination often pop up when we start seeing people through the lens of them being part of an out-group. Look, these cultural and gender blueprints are powerful, for sure, but they aren't destiny. By understanding how they work, by making the invisible visible, we get the power to question them, to challenge them, and to choose which rules we actually want to live by. So the real question isn't just what the blueprints are, but what you will choose to build with them.